A very warm morning to all of you. Let me bring this first session to the start. And the chair will be a session by Professor Neera Chandhoke, former Professor, Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. We have two speakers for this session, and the first speaker will be Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, former Professor, Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. The second speaker will be Dr. Manindranath Thakur, currently teaching at Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And the discussion for the session will be Dr. Dhananjay Rai, who is a visiting fellow at the Center for Study of Developing Society, Delhi, and teaches at the Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar, India. I would just like to briefly tell you all about the theme for this session, and it is basically about what are the impediments that we are facing in terms of our thinking and imagination, and how do we make attempts to overcome those impediments. So with that brief comment, I would now like to hand over the session to the chair.
Thank you, Suresh. And I'm sorry, I have a bad throat for the past 8 days, so maybe I won't be able to speak too much, but I'm not supposed to speak. I'm very happy, and congratulations to the Manendra, Savita, Dhananjay, all you young people who have guided this creative theory colloquium. Whenever I get an email, I say it must be Teachers' Day that they've organized it. It's really a stupendous effort. Now, the act of thinking, it strikes me that this is particularly apt for our society here and now, indeed global societies. There was a time when we thought that we had to act radically. We had to take out processions, we had to participate in protest meetings, we had to write subversive literature. But increasingly, since the second decade of the 21st century, we have been overcome and we have been stifled by right-wing authoritarianism, populism, which not only specializes in destroying every institution that protects the individual from the state, but which also specializes in capturing your hearts and minds, often through the most ridiculous language and the most ridiculous vocabularies, which anybody said, what are they talking about? But for some reason, these vocabularies have attracted people, and we ought to figure out why are they so attractive to people who were perfectly right thinking till about 8 years ago. The act of thinking in such circumstances becomes a profoundly subversive act. Because when you think, you reflect, and when you reflect, you ask questions. And the act of asking questions of the difference between what is and what should be, there could be nothing more subversive than that. There was a time when left-wing intellectuals would talk about the paralyzing hold of consumerism, of ideology, of our page 3s in the newspapers, of the fashion industry, of Bollywood, as paralyzing the mind. This is infinitely more dangerous because it doesn't allow you to ask questions. I mean, when you look at the state of the media, you realize how much the media has become a PR department of the government rather than being an arm of civil society. I therefore am of the firm belief that the moment you start thinking, you are subverting the foundations of this newly created authoritarianism that seeks to capture our lives and which has given us no breathing space. I look forward very much to hearing my colleague and friend Manoranjan and Manendra. So may I hand over the mic to, metaphorical mic, to Manoranjan Mohanty.
Thank you, Neera. Happy Teachers' Day. I think Ranjit Singh would have been tremendously happy to see the way it has moved on. This effort to think, act, and grow creatively. I think the issues which have been laid out already by Manindra, Neera, Savita, they lead us further to a very real challenge, and Neera highlighted this very well, the new face of authoritarianism. In fact, what is under attack is the right to think. I remember the preamble to the Indian Constitution. The framers very imaginatively had put freedom of thought as one of the, liberty of thought, expression, faith, worship, etc. So thought was indeed mentioned, but now just stating our preference for freedom of thought is not enough. I think the right to think is being denied. In fact, go back to history, colonial, pre-colonial, the history of class society, history of caste order. Rulers always wanted to arrogate themselves the right and privilege to think, and they ruled only to implement, to act. The whole concept of the caste order and Brahminic society was that. And this was dramatically demonstrated during the colonial era. And but it was not unique to colonial era. That is very important to recognize. Whether it is the Chinese Mandarins, the scholar bureaucrats had the right to think, and the others were to implement, to do things according to laws already worked out. Here too, Brahmins protected by the Kshatriya kings. But the interesting thing is that the movement for right to think and act, and I noticed Neera's very interesting formulation, act of thinking. Thinking is also an act, and we have a whole great tradition from Marx to Marcuse, the unity of knowing and doing, unity of thinking and action, unity of theory and practice, all in a dynamic process, unending dynamic process. And so this now has a new form under the right-wing authoritarianism in the US, in India, in Europe, in so many countries of the world. And in India, we are confronting it squarely. Now, the point to remember about this history is that there was struggle. From Buddha to Ambedkar, the Brahminic right to think and deny that right to the, whether it is so-called slaves or citizens meaning the not the wise, the rest of the citizens, or the colonial, not subjects. The English word subject has a very, I have no time to discuss that, very, very peculiar meaning. And Mamdani has really put it squarely from subject to citizen. Whereas really we were colonial objects. We did not have the nature of subjecthood, subject in the sense of active agents, active subjects, subjects with will and agency. So in fact, the present epoch, the anti-colonial struggle, the anti-race struggle, the anti-patriarchal struggle, the anti-caste struggle is the transition from objecthood to subjecthood, from being objects of exploitation by caste, by slave owners, by capitalists, by landlords, by colonial masters, to active subjects of agency, the creative agents. In fact, that transition has to be noticed. So we are in the process of becoming agents, active subjects, agents of transformation. Therefore, the main point I would like to highlight is that today the right to think is under attack. And whoever conceived this theme of the seminar, I congratulate this group, which must have dialogued and evolved this formulation. So future of thinking has many challenges, but history also gives us opportunities. And future of thinking about transforming the existing order, existing unequal oppressive order, or future of thinking about transformative politics is even more challenged. I would add a second point by highlighting the two big challenges of our time. The new shape of authoritarianism, the new content of authoritarianism. It's not only right-wing, it has new modes of manipulation. It has new linkages with global techno-capitalist monopolistic order. Therefore, I mean, in India, the discourse is very, very interesting. The discourse is about being self-reliant, Atmanirbhar, but at the same time global. So global in the sense of becoming a global market for some, or seeking a global market for the Indian capitalist monopoly producers. And at the same time, talking about roots or the great Indian tradition, and reviving all that. But in the process, the focus is on the discourse on duties, duty to implement, duty to put into action what has already been thought of, decided. And please remember, the truth discourse has always been like this. Some people claim that they have the truth, they can state the truth, whether in terms of scriptures or commandments or decisions. But as dialectical and historical materialism, from Marx to Gramsci and Marcuse, we know that there are contradictions, and contradictions have the dynamics, and therefore no claim to deterministic vision, deterministic formulation on truth can be accepted. This is why, by very definition, and we always exchange this greeting on the Teacher's Day, Pariprasnena Sevaya, questioning the teacher and transcending the teacher is the best service to the teacher. In other words, right to question is the definition of education and create new knowledge. So, so the new shape, the new authoritarianism, the new characteristics of authoritarianism and its mode of functioning. Sometimes it is blatantly fascist in the familiar way. Sometimes it is covertly fascist, covertly oppressive. And it manipulates in many, many different ways by manipulating the symbols and the linkages we have to identify. So the first big threat to right to think and right to pursue transformative thinking is from authoritarianism. The other new challenge is from the new state of technology in the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And, the same right wing also talks about IR 0.4, Industrial Revolution 0.4. Look at the new education policy in India. It has the aim of making it compatible to IR 0.4, the new technology, artificial intelligence, and the defining characteristics of modernity today are connected with this. In other words, human faculties of thinking from labor and labor has acting and thinking both in it. Again, and we have discussed it in other fora, how class society and the oppressors had created grades of labor, gradations of labor, creating the great schism between manual labor and mental labor. Whereas all labor involves mind and physical, both, hand as well as mind, both, all labor. Whereas class society and capitalism particularly has made gradation, I would say degradation of labor, and accordingly gradation and degradation of economy. So you know the history of economic development from agrarian society to industrial society to service society to now fourth stage of industrial revolution. And so this new technological challenge has to be comprehended. In other words, we earlier thought that right to thinking was more autonomous. Now, artificial intelligence, the truth machines, the forensic technology, there is a whole gamut of new artificial intelligence methods to even deny increasingly that autonomy of thought. But again, from the history of civilization, we find that there have been struggles for this unity of mind and body, mind and heart, mind and hand. Unity of, when Gandhi's concept of bread labor, you produce something using your hand on the soil that you use, just to challenge that concept of division of labor. And Marx's whole theory of alienation was about this only. Marx's theory of alienation, the one-dimensional man, was about this only. And therefore, we have seen a history of challenge. Again, from Buddha to the discourse in Indian multiple schools of philosophy that Manindra has talked about. And now we are experiencing all over the world. Therefore, I will conclude by saying that history of planetary civilization as well as the living species civilization and the human civilization, all three layers over the millennia have given us some tools and some insights of the struggle to assert the right to think and act together. That very, very narrow slogan, think globally and act locally. Think globally was arrogated to the World Bank theorists to think. And the rest of us all over the world, former colonies, etc., were to act locally, implement that locally. sorry, we have a new planetary, global, emergent universal, as Manindra put it. Therefore, think, act, reflect, change at every level, and mutually, collectively, together. And that is why the Asia, Africa, Latin American tradition, as the concentrated zones of colonial oppression, and we saw the multiplicity of contradictions intensify and operate. That is what had moved people like Fanon, Mao, Guevara, many others to theorize anew. And we have Asaflan perspectives and Asaflan subjectivities in Europe and America, North America also. So Asaflan perspective, the third world perspective, or the, again, I agree, we are post-colonial, but we have to see this history of oppression, the layers and multiplicity and interfaces of oppression on the one hand, and interfaces of liberation struggles on the other, globally throughout, and derive our energy. And the Association for Creative Theory, together with many such creative initiatives all over the world, including the Marcuse Society, a great partner in this endeavor, I'm sure has a wonderful agenda to inspire us and take us forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoranjan. It was refreshing after such a long time to hear someone, and Manoranjan has always stood for third world solidarity, or the solidarity of the global South. It's very rare these days. I mean, now we have a BRICS. We don't have any longer the notion of the kind of non-alignment that Nehru had given us. And I think we've lost out a great deal on solidarity. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure listening to you. Manendra, could you please make your presentation?
Thank you. Thank you. I will begin with thanking two of my teachers sitting in the panel, Professor Chandhoke and Professor Mohanty, who not only encouraged us to think afresh, to think creatively, but also in true senses, tolerated our hard critiques, sometimes senseless critiques, sometimes sensible critiques. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us for so long, and I'm sure we will continue for many more decades. I'm remembering an anecdote that I encountered a person while doing a field work in one of the villages, which is known for nurturing a prominent Indian philosophy called Nyaya Vaisesika. This old man was a philosopher, was of course a professor also, but staying in the village. And he was teaching a lot of young children. And I asked him that, what do you think is the biggest problem? And this is I'm talking of 2003. And what do you think humanity's most important problem today? He said, the most important problem is of thinking. Soch ka sankat. So I asked him, I didn't take it seriously. I thought that he's just making a point. But then he explained it to me that, well, thinking is spontaneous for human beings, but we have to work hard to think. And I'll explain this further. But interestingly, in 2012, in JNU, a few of my friends, we were walking in the morning, and one of my friends, Professor Akhlaq Ahan, informed me that he has written a long poem. And the title of the poem was Sochne Pe Pehra Hai. Thinking is being guarded. Or there is a kind of guard on thinking. And he dedicated that poem to the creative theory group. He told me that while walking, I first time realized that increasingly thinking is becoming very difficult. And we are not being allowed to think. Remember, this is 2012. So it is not only a regime, it's a kind of emerging trend in our society that we have been witnessing. I'll make 3 brief points. The first point will be about what Professor Chandhoke said, thinking as a political act. And second is about politics of imagination, how there's a new politics that's in play, and we really have to be very conscious of this politics, apart from politics of knowledge. And third thing is, how do we reclaim our Swaraj in thinking? What are the possibilities? Where are the resources? And draw lessons to reclaim Swaraj in thinking. I think thinking is a political act. We have realized that thinking is most common to humans, but not spontaneous. There is a difference between thinking and contemplating and feeling, and so many other words are used for mental activities, but thinking is a very specific word. It needs a direction. What are we thinking upon? Are we thinking about something? And why are we thinking about that? I think thinking is a particular moment when we use our reflexive capacity as humans to resolve certain problems that we face. So what are the problems we are facing? And why are we interested in resolving them? Where do we want to go? So thinking is an act of transforming. Thinking has always been an act of transforming. As Professor Mohanty rightly said, I mean, I was just trying to trace the creative movements in Indian intellectual history. And I realized that 6th century BC, Vaishali, you have a very interesting moment. In 10 kilometers radius, you are having Buddha and Mahavir living together. And also Ajit Keshkambal, who is a materialist. And there's a state whose minister is Charvaki, who is training the king to believe that body is the most important thing. You enjoy only through the body. And there's another state whose main philosopher is Jain philosopher, suggesting that you really have to abandon the body at some stage. And there was a lot of conflict. And in the middle of that conflict, a new philosophy emerged called Anekantvad, that everybody could be true and let's have a dialogue, something that Gandhi picked up later on and suggested that he was Anekantvadi. There were several moments in history of Indian intellectual tradition. I'm sure in many countries, such moments must have happened where thinking was enhanced and thinking was transformative and thinking was dangerous. I mean, Socrates, of course, faced that danger. In India, probably that didn't happen, physical elimination, but probably intellectually we remember that we don't get any text of Charvaks. We discover Charvak only through the text in which he has been mentioned. So thinking is a political act. It has always been a political act. And I think this is the most dangerous act for the ruling classes. Ruling classes do not want people to think, and therefore they are very conscious about controlling all spaces of thinking. The more authoritarian they are, the more authoritarian the state is, we realize there is more control on thinking. So thinking is never an spontaneous thing. It's really, one has to work hard to think. And to think is to protest in a way. To think is to question, as Professor Mohanty rightly said. And therefore, thinking is essentially a political act. It is not an individual act also. Let me also emphasize on this point. Thinking is a collective act. It's a social act. And thinking has to be constantly connected with the real world. I remember when Vivekananda was told by his friends that we should go to Himalayas and meditate. He said, no, that's not my job. I will think in society, stay here and fight against exploitations, fight against kind of humiliation we are facing. So thinking, I think, is deeply connected with transforming the real world in which we are living. Recognizing the structures of domination and breaking those structures of domination, these are the subjects of thinking. So thinking has a target, thinking has a mission, and that mission is political mission. Therefore, thinking, I think, is essentially a political act. But what are the impediments to thinking today? What are we experiencing at this moment? I think with the deepening crisis of capitalism, and this crisis of capitalism may not be economic crisis. I think this is a deep philosophical crisis of capitalism. Capitalism started with a great legitimizing philosophy that it will work for the common good. If we look at Locke and Adam Smith, the central argument is about common good. And then the common good was reasserted during the welfare economics. But in 70s, the common good, instead of being material good, became freedom within quote. And now, since 2008 crisis, capitalism does not have any solid legitimizing philosophy. And if the system does not have a legitimizing philosophy, it becomes very dangerous. But then it becomes authoritarian. The gap is so much increasing between haves and have-nots. The centralization of capital is so much now that capital in partnership with the state is ready to abandon democracy. The marriage between democracy and capitalism seems to be over. The model people are talking about, for instance, Piketty is trying to warn the liberal societies or capitalist societies that if you don't change your model, then the Chinese model will become very dominant. And the Chinese model is authoritarian democracy model. You will have to a socialist democracy model counter to that. Many states now are trying to follow Chinese model as they think that that is more productive for capital. I think India is one of them at the moment. Now, this kind of state, which I call techno-authoritarian state, the state which has a vision of development, which is not pro-people, it is pro-capital, will create several kinds of things, or several kinds of laws, reforming labor law in a particular way, or treating defense as development. That's what India is doing now. Will definitely be more authoritarian, as it is supported by technology also now. So each one of us are subject to surveillance. We are being seen by the big boss. And with technology, I think this has become so easy. So this state is not interested in thinking people. And the onslaught on the universities, not only physical, but also financial, the reduction of the budget, the introduction of the new education policy, where, as Professor Mohanty said, AI is going to play a big role. Human interaction is going to be reduced. What is emerging is that our imagination is being controlled, not only through media, not only through syllabus that is being reformed, not only through unification of courses at the central level, not only by deciding what shall we teach in the classroom and how shall we teach in the classroom, but also by very indirect means. So gradually, we are giving up that autonomy that we had. In our imagination, I think fear is being created. I mean, after looking at the program, a close friend of mine who is in police called me and asked me, what are you going to do in this? I hope you are not speaking something which will go against you. I mean, he's a friend of mine. He was not calling as a police, but I can see that you get phone calls after you speak something, and people will tell you that please don't do this. So this is a kind of fear that is being installed. I think fear and distrust are becoming organizing principle of our society. And that is biggest impediment to our thinking. Consumerism, of course, is creating consent. We are trying to think that there is no alternative, and we have stopped thinking. And this is very common nowadays. Friends chatting and talking, let's stop thinking. So I think this thinking and the limits of thinking that is being created by the state today in itself, it is creating a new imagination, or it is controlling our imagination. It's a kind of politics of imagination that we can see in today's world. Now, how do we reclaim our right to think? I don't think the state is interested in granting the right to think, and I don't think we are able to really articulate any agenda to raise a movement for right to think. Right to education, we can raise a movement. Right to livelihood, we can raise a movement. If we say right to think as a movement, that would be very difficult to raise at this moment, at least, unless we realize at some stage that thinking itself is being controlled. Thinking is being controlled by state, it is controlled by market, it is controlled by capital, it is controlled through fear, it is controlled through distrust. So this control on thinking, how do we overcome that? How do we fight for Swaraj in thinking? I'm sure there must be resources in other societies, in other struggles. One has to really engage with different political struggles to see how they have reclaimed their right to think. But definitely in India, we have a great tradition of such a struggle. And I will discuss three thinkers briefly who give us some resources for right to think: Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Tagore. If we approach them from this angle, that how did they try to think at that moment when it was a colonial state and people were not aware of colonialism that way? They had double task: fighting against the state, making people aware, and also challenging the structures of domination which were produced by Indian society itself. Various kinds of structures of domination, caste was one of them. So this challenge, how did they meet? How did they reclaim their right to think at that time when modernity or colonial modernity was emerging as the most dominant frame of thinking? As if individualism was a dominant ideology of the state being propagated, and we were almost accepting that. I think Gandhi's contribution was that he said that you must reclaim your agency to think first. How do you reclaim your agency to think? By sacrifice, by connecting with people, by thinking for the last person in society, Gandhi's tabis. Once we start thinking from there, then a lot of people will come with you to think. And your your thought will be liberative. You can transform and limit your or make your life transparent, make your everyday life transparent. Communicate with people not only through words, but through your life. As he said that my life is my message. So I remember the way he was speaking. I was listening to his last speech, which has been aired by All India Radio. So a lot of people were not around that last few years. A lot of people were shouting slogans, "Zina ko kaid karo, Zina ko kaid karo." And Gandhi came and he said that, yes, I have to do that. Zina ko kaid karna zaruri hai. We have to arrest Jinnah. But I don't have state power. Where shall I arrest Jinnah? I will arrest Jinnah in my heart. And we all will arrest Jinnah in our heart. And then he started his speech. I think that agency that Gandhi acquired to think, and think collectively, not individually. Thinking collectively, thinking politically, that agency came to Gandhi through various means that he adopted, through various techniques that he adopted. So, art of thinking and technique of engaging with people while thinking, one has to learn from Gandhi. Second one is Ambedkar. The single most important point, and which I think is also Marx's point, that freedom of all, one, should be freedom of all. So my freedom should be your freedom also, which means that fight against the structure of domination without creating a reverse structure of domination. I think that was Gandhi's point also, but Ambedkar was very clear about it in his article on annihilation of caste. He is very clear that we don't need to really recreate that structure of domination, reverse the structure of domination, but we have to break the structure of domination. We have to transform that structure of domination. So if we do that, then the collective thinking will be possible. What's happening today is when we are trying to challenge this politics of imagination, the alternative we are creating is again capturing the realm of imagination. We are not creating that freedom. I mean, I can talk about political parties also. Recently, a very important political leader from one of the left parties has been removed because he made certain comments which doesn't go by party line. We had a long debate. Last 2 days, we have been debating about it, whether it was justified or not. I think political parties are also part of the same state structure. We have to rethink about autonomy of thinking within these structures. So reclaiming thinking is not only against the state, but also against other institutions which are connected with the state, either working for the state, against the state, or with the state. So reclaiming autonomy within education system, autonomy to think, is also, I think, important point. So Ambedkar's this idea that you don't create another structure of domination is another thing that will provide us an agency to collectively think. And third is Tagore, who says that in his small monograph called Sadhana, and he says that thinking is a sadhana. What would be the right word for sadhana?
Meditation.
No. Endeavor. No strict translation. It can be endeavor.
Sadhana is concentrating upon something while you're thinking. It's a kind of meditation.
Yes, I mean, there is no strict English term.
Not in the spiritual sense. I'm talking about meditation in the terms of reflection.
Yeah.
So what Tagore suggests is that, well, we have resources in our civilization but they do not come to us spontaneously. We have to work hard for that. So this autonomy to think, and he quotes Bowles. Look at the Bowles. They don't bother for the state. They don't bother for the ruling classes. During the colonial regime, the Bowles were autonomous, freely thinking and moving all around. And what they were arguing, what Tagore quotes them, moner manus, there is a human being within yourself, and reclaim that human being. Reclaiming that human being is sadhana. And that human being is a universal human being, the species being that Marx talks about. And when you do that, you get rid of the alienation that is being created by capital. And if you are a person without feeling alienation, you will be able to think freely. What Gandhi talked about, the isthit pragya, the fundamental condition for free thinking is being isthit pragya. Means, I don't know what is the exact translation for isthit pragya, but going beyond happiness and sorrow. Is that isthit pragya? I don't know. I don't have the right translation.
Fully contented.
Maybe. I don't see. So when you are isthit pragya, you are not troubled by anything, and you keep thinking beyond your existence. Probably you reclaim that thinking, and Tagore says that is a sadhana that you will have to do.
Manendra, sorry, but time constraints.
Just half a minute. So I think these three aspects of thinking and reclaiming that thinking is extremely important for our future and future for thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very thoughtful. May I call upon Dhananjay to make his comments? Dhananjay, 10 minutes, please, because we do want a discussion on these two presentations and yours, possibly.
Thank you, ma'am. And happy Teachers' Day. I'm speaking before my three teachers, and I learned the art of critique from my three teachers. So thank you so much for this opportunity and comment. And I agree with the larger argument about Professor Chandhoke's comment and Professor Mohanty's comment and the Professor Monin's presentation. Subverting the authoritarianism is very important, and this came out brilliantly in Professor Mohanty's presentation, like act of thinking, and we have to face new technological challenges in form of artificial intelligence. Unity of mind and heart is an important point made by Professor Mohanty, and he highlighted the importance of a right to think and act together. Think, act, and act collectively are important points in Professor Mohanty's argument. And Professor Monin's like thinking as philosophical act and thinking as imagination, and Swaraj in thinking are very, very important, and we need to mobilize resources for this. And he mobilizes resources from Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Tagore. So thinking is political act, not spontaneous. Thinking is not contemplation. Thinking can't be called musing in Professor Thakur's presentation. Thinking needs certain direction. And I think thinking is also towards transformation, and it is a political act. And he highlights the crisis of capitalism, that is called philosophical crisis, from common good to freedom, and we don't have any philosophy of capital, and thereby we have crisis. So we can have resources from Gandhi, Ambedkar in form of collective thinking, and also reclaiming the human being. I have some queries which are, these are specific to Professor Mohanty and to that in entire, and Professor Mani as well, that we have missed the, or we couldn't highlight the intertwined relation between capital and religion. I mean, when we are discussing authoritarianism, that how can we not discuss the nature and the form of religion in contemporary time, and how religion and capital are working together to support each other in contemporary crisis. This is one I think we need to highlight. But to be more specific, This is to Professor Mohanty. What explains the transition from earlier so-called liberal democracy to authoritarianism? And second, if capital was happy earlier, then why now collusion with authoritarianism? I mean, this is, and third, do we see now authoritarianism guiding capital or capital is guiding authoritarianism? And fourth, to Professor Mohanty, regarding progressive movement. Can we say that progressive movements fail to realize the difference between politics and the political? Politics is solely relying on the institution, and lots of acts of civil society focus on the politics, that is the institution, while not realizing the significance of political, that is constant churning. This is to Professor Mohanty. A very small question to Professor Thakur. Where do we see relation between capital and religion in this crisis? And because I was waiting you to come and comment on religion and capital and authoritarianism, but religion was, I think, missed in the discourse. If we thought that religion is as a politics, that was the first stage, it was ridiculed by many of us. Then we came to the second stage, religion as a philosophy. We all accepted religion as a philosophy. Now we also see the religion as a theocracy, I mean, in an absolute and complete sense. So do we agree that religion is religion as a theocracy? And the last point to Professor Thakur, curtailment on thinking is gift of religion by capital, gift of religion to capital. If let me put differently, I'm saying that curtailment on thinking is the centrality of religion. Can we say that that was gifted to capital by religion? It is not intertwined with capital ipso facto. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhananjay.